This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's economy beats expectations, growing 5% in the first quarter, powered by strong exports and industrial output. But rising oil prices from the Middle East conflict could hit demand going forward. Well, the U.S. turns up the heat, warning countries buying Iranian oil could face sanctions, with 2 Chinese banks already flagged. Beijing hits back, saying it opposes, quote, illegal unilateral sanctions. Well, Pakistan says that the U.S. and Iran are keeping channels open for talks, but no date or venue is set. Tehran's nuclear program remains a key issue, with stability in Lebanon seen as key to any progress. And Australia is boosting defense spending to 3% of GDP by 2033, up from 2% now. It plans to add $38 billion, calling it the biggest peacetime build-up. The security risks reach their most complex since World War II. Also ahead, Korean food is already a staple in Singapore. Now it's drinks are having a moment. For many consumers, Korean alcohol still means one thing: soju in a green bottle. But that familiar image is shifting. We'll look at what's driving the change. China's economy grew 5% in the first quarter of this year, driven by resilient exports and strong industrial output. Now, that's up from 4.5% in the previous quarter. But economists warn that uncertainty from the Middle East conflict could cloud the outlook. CNA's Tan Soo-hui with this report.
China's economy got off to a stronger than expected start in 2026, fueled by strong exports, up 14.7% in the first quarter from a year earlier, even though growth slowed to a 5-month low in March. Industrial output also rose 5.7%, beating estimates. While Beijing said this showed greater resilience and vitality, it also warned of a more complex and volatile external environment.
中国作为一个深度融入全球经济的一个大国肯定会受到一些影响。但是呢，我们相对来讲还是要有优势，我们的产业链完整，我们的能源结构更加优化，我们各方面的保障条件更加充裕另外一个呢，这个出口的韧性也更强。所以我们讲影响呢可能有一些，但是总的来讲，我觉得影响一个是有限，第二呢是可控的。
Analysts say China may be insulated from the immediate impact of the war, but higher oil prices could weigh on external demand in the long run. That also as domestic consumption remains a weak link. Retail sales rose 1.7% in March, down by more than 1 percentage point compared to the first 2 months of the year, which got a Spring Festival holiday boost in February. Real estate also continued to drag on growth, with property investment down 11.2% in the first quarter.
GDP is grow by 5%, but the disposable income growth in real term is grow just by 4%. So it's basically saying that the economy prosperity or the really stellar GDP growth does not translate into high income growth to average Chinese people. So I think the deteriorating in income distribution will also start to hurt the consumer confidence for the rest of this year.
China has set its GDP growth target for this year between 4.5 and 5%. But amid uncertainty over the Iran war, the IMF has cut China's growth forecast to 4.4% this year. Analysts say more policy support could be on the cards, especially to boost services consumption, including tourism.
Now the Chinese tourists couldn't go to the Middle East, such as UAE, to spend their holidays. Now they might decide to travel domestically or travel within Asia Pacific area. So I do think like service consumption and tourism has more potentials to grow. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more subsidies or policies earmarked to boost the service spending.
Even so, much will depend on how global risks evolve in the months ahead. with the Iran war's likely impact on China's export-led growth, analysts say Beijing may also step up its diplomatic role, pushing for more dialogue, especially as a prolonged conflict in the Middle East could further weigh on its economic outlook, also placing higher stakes on an expected visit to China by U.S. President Donald Trump next month. 谭子慧 CNA 北京。
The U.S. is threatening to sanction buyers of Iranian oil as it maintains a naval blockade of Tehran's maritime trade in the Strait of Hormuz.
We have told countries that if you are buying Iranian oil, that if Iranian money is sitting in your banks, we are now willing to apply secondary sanctions, which is a very stern measure.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that they have warned two unnamed Chinese banks not to process Iranian money or face sanctions. Reuters news agency reported similar warnings of potential U.S. punitive measures sent to China, Hong Kong, the UAE and Oman, where banks were said to allow Iranian illicit activity. Beijing, reacting to the possible penalties, said it has always opposed what it calls illegal unilateral sanctions, which have no basis in international law. The U.S. Treasury also taking aim at Iran's oil transportation infrastructure, imposing sanctions on more than 24 individuals, companies and vessels. The move comes weeks after Washington issued temporary waivers on Iranian and Russian oil at sea to relieve pressure on global energy supplies. Well, Mr. Bessent confirmed both waivers will not be renewed. The Iranian measure expires this Sunday, while the Russian exemption lapsed last weekend. Now, even as the U.S. ramps up pressure, diplomatic efforts continue behind the scenes. Key mediator Pakistan says that the United States and Iran are willing to hold talks as it keeps communication channels open between the two sides following last weekend's failed talks in Islamabad. Well, the Pakistani Foreign Ministry says details of the potential renewed discussions have yet to be decided, but that Iran's nuclear program remains a key issue on the table. It also says that peace in Lebanon is essential for progress, as Israel's cabinet discusses a possible ceasefire in Lebanon, raising hopes for de-escalation in the region. Now, Israel says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will speak with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun amid indications from U.S. President Donald Trump that talks between the two sides could take place today. Lebanon, however, is reportedly not aware of any planned contact. Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif is on a 4-day visit to Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey. He met Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia yesterday and has just arrived in Qatar. Separately, Pakistan's army chief has held talks with Iran's top diplomat, Abbas Araghchi, carrying what Iranian state media describes as a new message from Washington. But for more, we've got Hira Mustafa covering the story for CNA, speaking to us live from Islamabad. Hira, first up, just how challenging will it be for Pakistan to try to bridge gaps between Washington and Tehran when the next round of talks actually take place?
Well, absolutely. It's going to be an uphill battle for the Pakistani officials as both the sides are standing firm on their demands with respect to Iran's nuclear program. What we are hearing is that Pakistan's military chief is trying to bridge the gap and find a common ground and is trying its best to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table. Currently, both the parties are stuck on a 5 years uranium enrichment plan to 20 years of a uranium enrichment plan. As what we hearing from the Iranians is that they say that America's demand of putting ban on Iran for 20 years of stockpiling uranium is quite unreasonable. So the country's army chief, who is currently in Tehran, is trying to find out a middle way out to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table and to defuse the tensions between the two. As he is someone who is deeply trusted by the current U.S. administration, he is someone who is highly praised by the U.S. President Donald Trump on multiple occasions, and he always calls him his favorite field marshal. So he is trying his best to bring the warring parties to the table of diplomacy. He is also in direct communication with the American leadership. Simultaneously, the country's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif is on a 4-day diplomatic tour to rally the support from Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey. After culminating his visit to Saudi Arabia, he has just landed in Qatar, where he will be speaking to Qatari officials. Will be briefing them about ongoing mediation efforts and how Pakistan is trying to narrow the gap that has evolved over the past years with regards to Iran's nuclear program. So in this whole scenario, China's role is also very pivotal, because China is leveraging its ties with Pakistan to diffuse the tensions between Iran and Washington. And right after the foreign ministers' quad meeting earlier in this month that was held in Islamabad between the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Egypt, we saw Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar making a quick stopover to China, and in which both the countries agreed on a 5-point peace plan with regards to the tensions in the Middle East. So it's important for China to play, and that's what we're hearing from many analysts in the capital, that China's role is pivotal, because China also imports Iranian oil, and it's important for its economy. So all the regional countries are rallying their support to Pakistan's mediation efforts.
So, Hira, if both U.S. and Iran fail to agree on a deal before the ceasefire's expiry, what is at stake here for Pakistan?
Well, absolutely. It's going to be a big setback for the country if the U.S.-Iran talks fell apart, because Pakistan's economy is not doing fine from the last couple of years. It relies heavily on the support of International Monetary Fund, and it's currently under $7 billion loan program. And Pakistan also imports 70 to 80% of crude oil that comes from the Middle Eastern countries, and its energy reserves also comes from Qatar. And ever since the war on Iran has started, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, so all the shipping lines are disrupted, and the country's energy reserves are currently running low. And with regards to this, we have seen that Pakistani authorities have rolled out a power outage plan nationwide, with power cuts lasting 6 to 8 hours, and that is actually having a great impact on average Pakistanis, because they are getting furious and frustrated with all these prolonged power cuts. So the stake here is high for Pakistan.
Many thanks for that update here, Mustafa, covering the story for CNA Live from Islamabad. South Korean President Lee Myung is set for a two-nation state visit to India and Vietnam starting next week. Mr. Lee is expected to reaffirm its special strategic partnership with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Monday, and talks will focus on new commitments under the joint framework. Seoul's shipbuilding expertise is also likely to be on the agenda as the Middle East crisis continues to disrupt maritime trade. Now, Mr. Lee will be in Vietnam from Wednesday. The Iran war also likely to be the focal point of talks between Mr. Lee and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam in Hanoi. A South Korean official says the leaders will focus on developing resilient supply chains. And for more, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk live from Seoul. So, Yun-suk, what is President Lee looking to achieve with this visit?
Well, President Lee Jae-myung is making that trip to those two countries to really expand economic partnerships, secure supply chain, and also strengthen the strategic ties beyond the traditional U.S.-China focus. Now, in India, it will be mainly economic cooperation. Now, the National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak, in a briefing to reporters, said that the two countries will be aiming to open a new chapter in economic cooperation in strategic sectors such as shipbuilding, maritime industries, finance, and defense. Adding that, the two countries will also be maintaining this close coordination on energy supply chains amid this rapidly, changing, shifting global dynamics stemming from this war in the Middle East. Defense and security dialogue will also be in the focus, as both sides would want to strengthen cooperation on the Indo-Pacific stability and the Korean Peninsula. Now, the two countries are expected to try and also upgrade this trade agreement that they now have with the aim to increase bilateral trade to about 50 billion US dollars. Now, currently, bilateral trade is at about 25 billion US dollars, and that's down from a peak at about 28 billion dollars in 2022. Now, it dropped because Indian exports to South Korea fell. You know, India is selling less to South Korea, and so experts believe that the trade imbalance is something that both countries would want to address. Now, in Vietnam, the numbers are even bigger. There's a target of 150 billion US dollars in bilateral trade by 2030. Now, the priorities there are infrastructure, the energy transition, including nuclear power, critical minerals, the supply chain stability, and AI. Now, Vietnam is already, you know, one of South Korea's most important manufacturing hubs, as South Korean companies have, you know, huge investments there, especially in semiconductors and electronics. And in fact, you know, Samsung accounts for a significant share of Vietnam's total exports now. So they will be trying to protect and deepen existing ties, but also open new ones like in clean energy and technology cooperation.
So President Lee's visit to Vietnam and India, just walk us through, I mean, what's going to be most significant about it?
Well, you know, this is going to be the first state visit by a South Korean president to India in 8 years. And so South Korea right now is really eager to strengthen this ties with the global South, especially those fast-growing economies like India and Vietnam. And experts here are saying that South Korea also wants more flexibility, resilience in trade and geopolitics. Also, Vietnam is interesting because this is going to be, this visit by Myung will be the first visit to Hanoi by a foreign leader since the new leadership took office, which experts say that, you know, this signals that Seoul is an early and important partner for Hanoi. So, you know, experts are saying that it's going to be a very busy, but also a very significant trip for Lee Jae-myung next week.
All right. Many thanks for that update. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk live from Seoul. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, TSMC's profit leaps to a fresh record as the race to develop artificial intelligence technology drives investment surge. Plus, Taiwan's stock market, supercharged by AI service providers, overtakes the UK's in total value.
All new on Singapore Hour.
I love to dance, and Singapore is full of people like me. If there's a dance style you want to try, it's likely there's a place to learn it.
Gold bars, fine art, rare whiskey, kept out of sight under lock and key. This is how the rich store their wealth in Singapore.
Don't miss Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
Very chaotic moment.
Midnight later tonight here in Thailand, it's too little too late.
And I asked whether there's a political element to it. Nobody can exactly tell you why.
Look, things are never perfect when you're engaged in politics. Each one doing what each one wants.
So what's the United Nations doing amidst this world of supreme chaos? We're pushing for answers every night on Asia Tonight.
My grandpa was the first one who came to Hong Kong.
I'm from Nepal and I live in Lisbon for many years now.
I feel that Thai people see me as a part of Landa. ¡Sawadee-ka!
Tengo que puedo coger lo bueno de la cultura china y quedármelo, y lo bueno de la cultura española y quedármelo.
I can't do anything because I stay in India 10 years.
I'm BT.
I'm proud of being Filipina, and at the same time, I'm proud of what I achieved here in Barcelona.
지금은 인도에서 거의 가족처럼 함께하고 있습니다.
남이 많은가?
Things can coexist together, and that's the beauty of Hong Kong as well.
When I lead to the Chennai, I feel like, oh God, I'm home.
Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, it is now time for your business news with none other than Roland Lim. So, Roland, tell us more about the Asian stock markets and how are they doing following Wall Street's record rally overnight?
Well, they were rallying as well. That, as well as an AI chip boom, boosting market value of Asian chipmakers. The S&P 500 overnight continued its two-week rally, hitting a record high, and investors here in Asia betting big on peace. Global equities hitting an all-time high, driven by investor optimism over a potential second round of U.S.-Iran peace talks and a possible extension of the current ceasefire. The MSCI All-Country World Index was up 0.3%, hitting a record level and heading for 10 straight days of gains. This is the longest winning streak since September. The index had dropped as much as 9% since the start of the war, hitting its lowest level last month, but has since managed to erase all of those losses. Asian stocks also rallying, gaining 1.3% and erasing war-triggered losses. Analysts say oil prices easing below $100 a barrel and hopes for a peace breakthrough contributing to that optimism. Renewed enthusiasm for tech stocks also helping to reverse last month's sell-off. Both the Nikkei and the Kospi closing in the green. Greater China markets also recording gains, both the Shenzhen and Hang Seng Index up by nearly 2%. Better than expected first quarter economic growth, also adding to that sentiment. The world's biggest contract chip maker, TSMC, has raised its outlook for this year, given global interest in AI. It's expecting revenue to grow more than 30%. The forecast was upgraded after a sterling set of first quarter results. Net profit jumped 65% to exceeding $18 billion in the first quarter results for the Apple and Nvidia supplier. Now that's on the back of a 41% jump in revenue on year. The optimism showing up also in capital spending, with executives saying that it could reach the upper end of the range of $56 billion. The chipmaker did sound a note of caution, however, saying the war on Iran could hurt profitability, eventually given the pressure on global shipping routes and energy prices. The stock was marginally up by the close of the market in Taiwan before the release of the results. Over the one-year period, it's already sharply risen by 143% as the wave of demand for AI-related chips boosts the shares. The robust AI boom helping Taiwan become the world's 7th biggest equity market, overtaking the UK in stock market capitalization. Now, that's despite the size of Taiwan's $977 billion economy, trailing behind the UK's $4.3 trillion. According to Bloomberg, the combined value of companies listed on the island has reached about $4.14 trillion, edging past the UK's market cap of roughly $4.09 trillion. Taiwan's market has been supercharged by AI service providers that depend on chips produced by TSMC, which, by the way, makes up 45% of the entire market capitalization. Taiwan's benchmark Taiwan Weighted Index has now erased all of its losses linked to the conflict, rising more than 11% so far this month. And by contrast, Britain's FTSE 100 has risen less than 3% this month amid lingering concerns over persistent inflation and higher interest rates. Foreign investors bought a net total of some $8.9 billion of Taiwanese shares in April, putting the market on track for a record month of inflows. Gold prices rebounding after a short-term pullback due to rising geopolitical risks and the strengthening of the US dollar. Robin Choi from State Street Investment Management explains if gold continues to glitter as a safe haven asset.
We did see the gold price being quite volatile in the first quarter. If we look at the annualized volatility, it's close to about 28%. So it's behaving more like an equity risk asset. Fundamentally, we still believe it's a safe haven asset in a way that it has been able to outperform equities and bonds year to date. But of course, the Iran situation, the oil supply shocks, it did lead to global investors selling gold. Basically, we saw that back in 2022. Initially, gold is a great buffer for investors to sell. So usually when there's other losses in other traditional asset classes, initially we see the sell-off. But now quickly we saw in the last 3 weeks, it had found a bottom about 4,001. Now it's recovering to about 4,008. So we still believe it's a great diversifier because obviously it's been impacted by the oil prices while we've seen quite a strong outflows from the US investors in March. If you look at in Q1, we actually saw a record inflows in the gold-backed ETFs in Asia, including Singapore. The dollarization is actually more significant in our region compared to the West. And in April, we actually seen the return of some of the inflows from the US as well. So that's why gold price has been quite well supported in the last couple of weeks. So if those synchronize in the next couple of months, we do expect the gold price to be well supported, maybe heading back to the 5,000 level that we saw a couple of weeks ago.
Well, China's push into high-tech manufacturing has helped buoy the economy and register market-beating growth in the first quarter. Now, Beijing can't control demand overseas, but it's been making it easier and faster for manufacturers to move goods at home. Well, CNA's Tan Yuguan has more on a pilot program in Henan.
Our story begins in Henan province. It is known as the cradle of Chinese civilization. It is also landlocked. Henan has no seaport of its own. The nearest major port is some 290 kilometers away. For Henan's most famous export, distance isn't a problem. Shaolin Temple martial arts can travel anywhere. But for most goods that Henan produces, exporting can be a hassle, be it tires, EV components, or phones. Traditionally, exporting these goods meant they are loaded, trucked, unloaded, maybe warehoused, inspected, then stuffed into a container before loading onto ships. Each step adds time, each step adds cost. But by working together, local officials in Henan and Shandong managed to cut all those steps down to the minimum. Manufacturers in Henan can now load goods directly into a shipping container brought to them right at their factory's doorstep. That container then goes to a nearby inland port within Henan. Here, custom inspections are carried out. And once cleared, the container is sealed. From there, the sealed container is loaded into a train bound for the Shandong coast to a major port like Qingdao. The containers are transported for hundreds of kilometers. When they arrive at Qingdao port, the key difference is what doesn't happen. There's no need to unload again for checks. The sealed container goes straight from rail to ship, and then from the ship to the rest of the world. Officials say this only works by breaking down silos between agencies and provinces. All this gives inland manufacturers better access to export markets. What's more, they report this reduces logistics costs down by about 10%. But this drive to cut costs for inland manufacturers is only part of a bigger story, one that begins along China's coast. China's push for more efficient logistics isn't an overnight effort. You see a slice of that long-running push spanning decades right here in Shanghai's West Bund. This area is now a riverside park, but behind me, those cranes are a reminder of what this place used to be. Part of Shanghai's working waterfront for bulk cargo along the Huangpu River. At the turn of the millennium, China's 10th five-year plan called for the strengthening of large container systems for the country's ports and outlined ambitions to raise Shanghai's status as an international shipping hub. But modern container shipping needs deep water and room to maneuver, which the Huangpu would struggle to provide. That's partly why Shanghai built Yangshan, 32 kilometers offshore, where ships can berth and turn. That enabled Shanghai to remain the world's busiest container port for 16 consecutive years. While Shanghai's ports didn't create China's export boom, it helped make it possible at scale, but allowing raw materials to come in and finished products to go out more efficiently. So these quiet cranes serve as a reminder that China's competitiveness isn't only about what it makes, but also about how efficiently it can move them out to the world. Tan Yuguan, CNA, Shanghai.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, a new UN report warns that a prolonged war in Iran could push nearly 9 million people in Asia into poverty. And China issues a U.S. safety alert for its citizens after scholars attending a conference were denied entry and being subjected to what Beijing calls unreasonable questioning.
Saturday on Japan Hour, cycle around Niigata and see over 200,000 sunflowers, never-ending rice fields, to the Iono River, where the locals are catching sweet fish. From the Japanese ayu to the famous koi, where 1 in 10,000 are selected to export to all over the world. Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA.
Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. MUFG, committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, no fuel surcharge from 216 Singapore dollars. And IHI.
You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines you're following. China's economic growth beat expectations in the first quarter, growing by 5%, driven mainly by manufacturing. Policymakers, however, are now bracing for a slowdown in exports amid the fallout from the Middle East conflict. Now, the U.S. warns countries buying Iranian oil could face sanctions as it flags 2 Chinese banks. Beijing has hit back, stressing it opposes what it calls illegal unilateral sanctions. And Pakistan says the U.S. and Iran are keeping channels open for talks, but no date or venue is set. Tehran's nuclear program remains a key issue, with stability in Lebanon seen as key to any progress. Well, amid what appears to be a stalemate between the U.S. and Iran, Ian Parmiter, former Australian ambassador to Lebanon, tells us why we can be hopeful that a deal could emerge.
What we have is that both sides actually do want to reach some sort of agreement. But what we have in the Gulf at the moment, in the Gulf and also the Strait of Hormuz, is akin to a Mexican standoff where both sides are pointing guns at each other. Now, at this stage, the U.S. blockade is preventing Iran from exporting oil through the strait. But Iran in turn has said that it will prevent the Gulf Arab states from exporting oil as well. So both sides realize that that's untenable for the long term. And I think a reason to be optimistic on this occasion is that reports indicate that they are now discussing the possibility of, the Americans want 20 years for Iran to be without any nuclear program at all. And the Iranians are saying that they might accept 5. Now, to my knowledge, this is the first time that Iran has actually contemplated pausing or giving up its nuclear program in this way. It's previously accepted the idea of going down to 3.67%, which is what's needed for normal civilian use. but not to give it up completely. It's always demanded its right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I think both sides want an agreement, and I think we can be hopeful. But being hopeful doesn't necessarily mean one is optimistic. A lot of things can always go wrong.
Well, as momentum builds for another round of talks, one issue is emerging as a sticking point: Tehran's frozen assets held overseas. Well, Iran's foreign ministry says that the issue was raised in talks last weekend, but no conclusion was reached. So what exactly are these frozen assets and why do they matter? Well, the exact value remains unclear, but estimates suggest that Iran has more than $100 billion locked up abroad. Frozen funds refer to money or financial holdings a country owns but cannot use. And these can include cash or foreign currency reserves held in overseas banks. Now, Iran holds money abroad largely from oil sales, and it also keeps foreign currency reserves in international banks to back the value of its currency, the rial. Well, Iran cannot access the funds because of sanctions, which then restrict its ability to move or spend the money. Well, unfreezing the assets is important to Iran because its economy is under severe strain. Well, the World Bank estimate Iran's GDP at about $475 billion. So this means the frozen funds could be roughly a quarter of its economy. That's why Tehran is pushing for access during negotiations. Now, according to analysts, the money could be used to finance imports such as food and medicine, rebuild infrastructure, and support post-war recovery. Iran's assets are spread across multiple countries and financial systems. Reports suggest significant reserves are held in China, India, Luxembourg, Qatar, and Iraq. The U.S. has long restricted Iran's access to these funds through sanctions, and the issue is expected to feature in any future talks between both sides. Well, amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, a United Nations Development Programme report has estimated 8.8 million people in Asia-Pacific households are at risk of falling into poverty. Now, the most immediate pain points: rising fuel and freight costs, resulting in lower purchasing powers, food insecurity, and weakened livelihoods. The report projects that the conflict would wipe off up to $299 billion from the region's GDP as governments strain to cushion rising costs. CNA's Yasmin Yonkers spoke to Kani Wignaraja, Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and the Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific at UN Development Programme. And she explained how energy disruption in the Middle East is able to impact many facets of the region, including human development progress.
We're seeing such a rapid transmission of the shocks carried mostly by fuel and freight charges into the region, because about 90% of crude oil and LNG that travels through the Straits of Hormuz actually head towards Asia and the Pacific. So it's an immediate transmission, and it's like setting, a forest fire ablaze. And we're seeing the immediate shocks with the rise in prices on fuel, food, and fertilizer across the region. We've looked at about 36 countries, and all of them, to varying degrees, are showing shocks, and some adapting fast. That's when you see a lesser simulated loss on the economy. But if for those that are not, that's where you see the upper end of a loss of about $299 billion just in this immediate period.
Okay, so that's the upper end figure that you've quoted. And you mentioned energy there. You've identified that as the main transmission channel. When it comes to soaring prices, with poorer households across Asia already exposed to inflation and weak purchasing power, how fast is this latest shock feeding through to them?
We have some countries in the region. I mean, if I look at countries like China that have significant reserve stocks of oil. And so they're able to cushion and buffer the transmission of this shock through stabilizing prices. What other countries are doing in the region is that they're trying to reduce and absorb the cost themselves. And so they've called on emergency measures so that poor households don't feel the immediacy of this. And, in most of our countries in Asia Pacific, the poorer households spend about 30% on the lower end of their income on food. So if you look at that and the cost of fertilizer, which unfortunately, again, in our region is very heavily fossil fuel based fertilizer, poorer households are seeing the harshest impact of this. That's why the poverty figures can be all the way up to 8.8 million people being pushed into poverty. And the most vulnerable are the low-income households, which are on the lower end of the skills, job skills market as well. So one drop in percentage of GDP is 2 percentage points drop in the lower skill unemployment rates. You see those going up very, very fast already.
Yeah, no doubt the knock-on effects of that would be dire. I must zoom in on Iran. In that country alone, your report finds that more than 5 million people are at risk of falling into poverty. How serious is that deterioration now?
So Iran was one of the countries which you saw an increasing rate of human development over the last years, and a growing middle class. With this shock, which is obviously the highest hit in our region, is on Iran directly, you're seeing that drop, not because of oil price, because they've got enough cushioning there that helps, but because they import food, fertilizer, and because of the destruction inside Iran on essential services, including health, education, and water. So that's where you're seeing the big hit with the direct impact of war on Iran's poorer, vulnerable communities. So it's about the upper end estimate on poverty is indeed that about 5 million people will suffer. Now, Iran's putting in a lot of cushioning effects as well to try and help and immediately try and provide relief to these people. Because it's going to take a while, though, to come out of the longer-term impact of the war on Iran.
Now, Australia is planning to raise its defence spending to 3% of its GDP by 2033, up from the current 2%. Well, the move follows what Canberra sees as, quote, its most complex and threatening circumstances since the end of World War II, and amid rising geopolitical tensions, including the US-China contest for influence in the Indo-Pacific.
As an island trading nation, our sea lines of communication literally define our national security. And so, as I've been saying for some time, the geography of our national security lies well beyond our coastline or even our immediate waters. We therefore need a defence force that can be out there, that can engage in impactful projection. And there is now a more stark economic asymmetry to modern warfare.
The government says it will spend an additional $38 billion over the next decade to reach the target. In the short term, spending will climb $10 billion over 4 years. Mr. Miles has described the expansion as the biggest peacetime increase in the country's history. The new target, however, falls short of Washington's calls for Canberra to lift defence spending to 3.5% of GDP. Well, the U.S. has jailed 2 of its citizens for their roles in helping North Koreans obtain remote IT work with U.S. companies. The Justice Department says the salary they received went to funding Pyongyang's weapons programs. Both New Jersey residents, 42-year-old Keja Wang was given 9 years, and 39-year-old Chen Sing Wang was sentenced to 92 months for crimes including conspiracy to commit money laundering and wire fraud. The duo were charged last year, along with 8 others outside the country who still remain at large. More than 100 U.S. companies were targeted by the so-called laptop farm operation, among them a number of Fortune 500 firms. Officials say the ruse potentially harmed national security and exposes a sophisticated scheme that made use of stolen American identities and exploited U.S. companies to generate millions of dollars for North Korea. China's foreign ministry has urged its citizens to be aware of security risks when traveling to the U.S. after a group of about 20 Chinese academics were reportedly subjected to what it called unreasonable questioning at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, where they were denied entry. China's foreign ministry said they had been holding valid U.S. visas and has advised citizens planning to go to the U.S. to strengthen safety awareness, ensure they make necessary preparations, and to avoid the Seattle airport. The ministry added that nationals should remain calm and rational when dealing with U.S. law enforcement. Well, the death of a researcher last month renewed concerns over the treatment of Chinese students in the U.S. Beijing in late March said that a citizen took his own life following, quote, hostile questioning by American law enforcement personnel. It has urged Washington to look into the case. Now, the U.S. has been tightening its scrutiny on Chinese students in recent years over national security concerns. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, tourist arrivals surged to a record high in South Korea. We'll tell you why. Plus, Korean alcoholic drinks such as soju are having a moment, but that may change as consumers in Singapore increasingly look beyond the familiar.
My grandpa was the first one who came to Hong Kong.
I'm from Nepal and I live in Lisbon for many years now.
I feel that Thai people see me as a part of Landa. ¡Sawadee-ka!
Que puedo coger lo bueno de la cultura china y quedármelo, y lo bueno de la cultura española y quedármelo.
I can't do anything because I stay in India 10 years.
I'm BT.
I'm proud of being Filipina, and at the same time, I'm proud of what I achieved here in Barcelona.
지금은 인도에서 거의 가족처럼 함께하고 있습니다. 남이 많은가?
Things can coexist together, and that's the beauty of Hong Kong as well.
When I lead to the Chennai, I feel like, oh God, I'm home.
Asia experiences some of the world's most powerful typhoons almost every year.
Shall I make a run with the camera?
Yeah.
Each typhoon presents itself as this set of problems which need to be overcome. My job is to figure out this complex puzzle.
This is getting really, really dangerous.
Scientists and storm chasers put their lives on the line to predict these storms.
Size ng eye, ilang kilometer? Makilagay ngayong latest, yung mas malino na forecast track.
And protect the public before it's too late.
那么接下来将会进入到台风防御的关键期。
Worst case scenario is super typhoon category.
We gotta go, man. There's some big winds coming through.
Watch the Typhoon Detectives, decoding the next big typhoon, on demand at cna.asia.
South Korea saw a record number of foreign tourist arrivals in the first quarter of 2026, the highest figure on record, up 23% from a year earlier. Around 4.76 million foreign arrivals were recorded in the first quarter, with March alone drawing more than 2 million visitors. Chinese tourists made up the largest share of arrivals at 1.45 million, up 29% on year, followed by the Japanese at more than 940,000, up 20.2%. Taiwan notched the fastest growth among major markets, with arrivals numbering more than 540,000, up 37.7% on year. Visitors from US and Europe totaled 690,000. That's a 17.1% increase. Tourist spending with foreign credit cards also up 23% on year, totaling $2.18 billion. Now, the record arrivals coincided with the comeback performance of K-pop group BTS, which was held in Seoul on 21st of March and drew more than 100,000 fans. Well, Korean food has become a firm favorite here in Singapore, and its drinks are apparently gaining ground as well. Yet when most consumers think of Korean alcohol, they still picture the ubiquitous soju in a green bottle. But that image is starting to shift, as Grace Chin finds out.
Not long ago, Korean alcohol in Singapore usually meant one of two things: soju, a rice-based spirit, or beer. But that picture is starting to widen. At this bar in Lifestyle Mall New Baru, Singaporean importer Dominic Tan is trying to introduce drinkers to a different side of Korean alcohol, starting with craft makgeolli, a fermented rice drink.
I think I've always been interested in makgeolli, but because all we got in Singapore was commercially made makgeolli bottles. The first time I went to Seoul and tried craft makgeolli for the first time in my life, it was life-changing for me.
That trip changed his palate. It also made him realize how limited the options were back home.
3 or 4 years ago, all we could get is makgeolli from supermarket. So just banana flavored or strawberry flavored, but not many other craft makgeolli. And when I say craft, I mean small batch or hand brewed.
Makgeolli used to be seen as a simple everyday drink, but here it's presented quite differently, more premium, more curated, and part of a wider shift showing how Korean drinks are being enjoyed here in Singapore.
For some customers, this is still a first introduction.
I was on TikTok scrolling, and this came up as one of the recommended Korean places. And I Googled it and found that it was a makgeolli bar, and it was quite interesting. I've never been to a makgeolli bar before, so I decided to try it.
Words fail me, but it's quite flavorful. It's quite a unique taste, and it doesn't really feel like I'm drinking alcohol, so it's quite good.
That curiosity did not come out of nowhere.
Korean drama shows a lot of drinking culture, not as just a transaction, but as a social ritual. So specific brands and people drinking alongside, it gets all exposed through those dramas. And Singaporeans, Southeast Asians love watching those dramas. So it gave that legitimate access to that Korean drinking culture. So the Korean cuisine also became very popular. It's not a niche food anymore in Singapore.
Korea's liquor exports rose in 2023, and the mix is widening beyond just soju. After falling to a pandemic low of $270 million in 2020, Korea's liquor exports jumped roughly 21% in 2023.
Singapore is well known for the great test bed, because once you are getting the recognition in Singapore, it's easier to move to country close to it, like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, or somewhere around, or even to Europe, move to Europe.
And that strategy is already showing up in trade flows. Kati says Korean alcohol exports to Singapore hit $6.1 million in 2024. It's now the 8th largest global destination for Korean spirits by value.
When companies are bringing new things to Singapore, it's oftentimes well experienced, I think, in two ways. First of all, since we're talking about drinks, people are multicultural and their palate is also multicultural. Foundationally, Singaporean consumers grow up navigating Chinese, Malay, Indian, Western food and drinks all simultaneously, and it's also a travel hub. So a lot of people come and go. So that builds a lower barrier to trying new things.
But the category is not only expanding through imports and bottle lists, it's also being mixed behind the bar. Born and raised in South Korea and now based in Singapore, Uno Jang was awarded the Altos Bartender's Bartender Award 2025 as part of the world's 50 best bars. At his new bar in the city's central business district, he's using cocktails, pairings, and ritual to introduce a broader Korean drinking culture, one that goes beyond soju bombs.
I don't believe, just using the Korean ingredient, it become a Korean bar. The ingredient has to be very intentional. My story, my experience, to explain it in the cocktail, I think people will get more exciting.
And for him, that means bringing in not just Korean ingredients, but Korean habits, such as how drinks are paired, shared, and enjoyed.
my experience as a Korean, I grew up with drinking and eating some of the pairings. I want to express that moments as I get it, the memories to our customer.
Green bottle soju may still be the first drink many think of when they think of Korean alcohol. But from craft makgeolli and traditional rice wines to Korean gin, whiskey, and cocktails, those growing the category here are trying to show there's much more to discover. Grace Shin, CNA, Singapore.
A record in the making. Chinese President Xi Jinping enters the list of Time magazine's top 100 most influential people for the 14th time. Now, it's the most by any individual on this year's list, which features individuals across politics, culture, and sports. The milestone marking Mr. Xi's continued global influence as China cements its central role in international politics, economics, and geopolitics. Mr. Xi was named under the Leaders category, which also highlighted Japan's Sanae Takaichi. She became the country's first female prime minister last October and won a strong mandate at the February polls. Now, Tokyo's governor, in an accompanying tribute, says that Ms. Takaichi has, quote, shattered the ceiling and described the milestone as a step toward a society in which women can thrive. Now, TSMC chairman and CEO C.C. Wei was featured in the Pioneers category. His entry included a profile written by NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who lauded Mr. Wei's leadership in, quote, one of the world's most consequential companies. Now, Blackpink's Jennie was named in the Artists category, marking the only Korean included in this year's edition. She made history as the first K-pop female solo artist to send 3 tracks from her album Ruby into the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously. A spotlight was cast on few Olympians for redefining what it means to be an athlete. The Icons category features Korean-American snowboarder Chloe Kim. She won silver in the halfpipe at the 2026 Milan-Cortina Winter Olympics after winning gold at both the 2018 Pyeongchang and 2022 Beijing Olympics. Well, we've got figure skater Elisa Liu. She was also featured following a historic performance at the 2026 Winter Olympics, where she won the gold medal in the women's singles event. It's a comeback like no other, with a starting claim on the 2025 World Championship title after stepping away from competitive skating. And I hope you've enjoyed this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on all our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.